on the sphere of radius r, refer to the standard angles theta and phi, where theta is this angle that determines the inclination with respect to the axis. I guess that's the longitude angle. And phi determines the meridian. Then for that coordinate system, the covariant tangent tensor has the following form: r squared 0, 0, r squared sine squared theta. That's for a sphere of radius 1. Excuse me, that's for a sphere of radius r. So once we have the covariant basis, we also have the contravariant basis that is defined as the matrix inverse of the covariant basis. S beta gamma equals the Kronecker delta of alpha gamma, where the definition of that object is obvious. Okay, so now, well, of course, the contravariant basis. S alpha equals S beta. Now we have almost our full collection of the metrics. Of course, there's also the determinant of this object, whose square root is called the volume element, maybe more appropriately the area element. There are Levi-Civita symbols, which will come later, but their definition is very similar, except they have 2 indices, not 3. And of course, there is the Christoffel symbol, which is very important for the definition of the covariant derivative. So let's derive the Christoffel symbol. Where can I write it? So I'm about to write something I will erase, so it won't occupy a prominent position. But let's define it by analogy with the Euclidean space, where it was defined the following way. If we consider, let's see, the derivative consider the derivative of the covariant basis with respect to one of the coordinates. So we'll have ds alpha, ds beta, ds alpha, ds beta. So these are 4 vectors. Each one of these 4 vectors can be decomposed with respect to the basis itself. And let's call those coefficients elements of the vectors of the Christoffel symbol. Gamma, alpha, beta, this gamma. And that's the definition of the Christoffel symbol. So the analogy with Euclidean spaces seems to be complete. Except, of course, there's one problem. And the problem stems from curvature. This derivative, the rate of change of the covariant basis element, if you just imagine what happens to S1, let's look at ds1, ds1. So it's the rate of change of the first basis vector with respect to the first coordinate. Right? As you can see, it'll curve with the surface. And when it curves with the surface, its rate of change will not lie in the tangential place. It will have a component normal to the surface. I think it's quite apparent. It will point slightly in that direction. Because that's the direction in which this vector is changing. It's picking up more and more of that direction curves. So this derivative lies in the overall ambient space. It does not lie in the tangent plane. And it is therefore not possible to decompose it with respect to the covariant basis, which is only capable of expressing vectors that lie in the tangential plane. So this definition is not possible, and the cause of this state of affairs is curvature. So this actually is a very positive step. It gives us a handle on the concept of curvature. So I'm about to erase the board and show you how to fix this problem, which is done in there are 2 ways of doing it. They're completely equivalent, and both of them will lead to the concept of curvature. I'll show you one and show you the other. Okay, give one. But for now, let me box this and cross it out so that this is captured. Okay, we're back, and you will recall an expression similar to this one in Euclidean spaces. I'm not sure if I've ever written on the board, but it's certainly very prominent in the book. We don't emphasize it early on. We show it as one of the interesting consequences of the primary definition that we use, the one that doesn't work on surfaces. But a definition such as this of the Christoffel symbol is actually very important. It shows its intrinsic nature. It shows that if we know the metric tensor and how the metric tensor changes from one point to another, which is captured by these partial derivatives, then we actually have the Christoffel symbol. That means that the Christoffel symbol can actually be defined strictly in terms of the covariant derivatives. The derivatives of the covariant metric tensor. That's actually very important. It's one of the ways to save the situation in our case right now. So our definition that we attempted here through the vectors didn't work, but we have the metric tensor, and we therefore have this definition. And remember what we want the Christoffel symbols for. We need the Christoffel symbols primarily in order to define the covariant derivative. And for the covariant derivative to have the tensor property, in other words, to produce the tensor output for tensor inputs, we only need a symbol, such as the Christoffel symbol, that changes according to a certain rule under change of coordinates. And a symbol defined in this way will change according to the right way, in order to the way that would lead to a great covariant derivative. So, on the surface, by analogy, or actually in any space, in any manifold, in which the metric tensor is defined the way we did it, or arbitrarily given a priori, if you write down a definition like this, you will have an object that changes according to the way you want from one coordinate system to the other. And it is therefore can be used in the definition of the covariant derivative, and everything's great. So this is one of the ways, the intrinsic way of introducing the Christoffel symbol, and it works just fine. However, we don't want to quite give up on our extrinsic approach that uses the covariant basis, because it's a very geometrically intuitive and very visual object. We don't want to give up our geometric intuition just yet, and we really want to be able to use and work with the covariant basis, because it's such a great object. So I will now write down what previously was used as a consequence of the definition of the Christoffel symbol, but it will now serve as the definition of the Christoffel symbol. And it is this. Alpha, beta is this dot product. But remember before, it followed from this definition by dotting both sides with the contravariant basis element. And these were the explicit components of this object with respect to this object. Now it can no longer be interpreted as the explicit components of this object with respect to the contravariant basis, because this object cannot be decomposed with respect to the covariant basis. However, it's still 8 numbers, and because it has this form, the same form as in the Euclidean space, of course it'll change by not necessarily the same rule, but completely analogous rule to the way it changed in Euclidean spaces. Because this can be taken as the definition in both cases, and then all of the analysis would be the same, and the rule by which this symbol is changing, actually that was one of the topics that I'm planning on backfilling. Today is April 21st, so if you're watching this a month or so from now, it's probably backfilled already, and you've seen it. If you're watching it shortly after I uploaded this, then you might not have seen it. But of course, it's all over the book. Okay. So this changes according to the rule that we want, and we can therefore use this object to define a covariant derivative, which is defined by the exact same rule as before. It's the partial derivative plus a Christoffel adjustment term for each of the indices of the object. All right, so now let's assume that the Christoffel symbol